The topic is bridging the funding gap, and basically the question is where to go for funding. First, before we talk about bridging the funding gap, Mr. Maini, what is an SME? You know, is it a kind of a company, or is it a stage that every company travels through?
A micro enterprise in the manufacturing sector is defined as having investment in plant and machinery up to 25 lakhs. In the small scale sector, investment in plant and machinery up to 5 crores. And in medium scale, investment up to 10 crores. For the services sector, the definition is halved in a way. The medium scale service sector would have investment in equipment as against plant and machinery there up to 5 crores. Small scale service enterprise would have an investment up to 2 crores. And the micro enterprise would be just 10 lakh, 1 million Indian rupees. Firstly, 95% of the units in the sector are more or less in the unorganized sector, in the sense that either they are proprietary firms or they are partnership firms. It's hardly 4 or 5% which would be in the corporate sector. So many of these units, they start off as small proprietary firms, partnership firms, and graduate from micro to small, small to medium. And there are many we know who have graduated well beyond that. A lot of it depends on the enabling policy framework, which we would touch in due course also.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Ranganathan, you know, we've just heard what the definition of an SME is according to the government policy. But in your opinion, and I don't think there's only one opinion on this subject, what do you feel is an SME? And again, you know, for example, is a company like Flipkart, is that an SME? Because based on the definition that Mr. Maini described, it might actually qualify as an SME. So in your view, would that be an SME? And do all companies pass through the stage of being an SME on their life cycle?
See, first of all, you have to address it from the macro perspective, is the perception problem. The system growth of advances to industry has grown about 20%. Growth to MSME system growth is about 18%, so it's slightly below the system growth. Within the MSME, Maini distinguished between the medium and the micro and the small. The micro and the small come under priority sector. Credit growth to them has been 20% CAGR, same as the aggregate. The credit growth to medium sector is only 2% in the last 5 years, CAGR. So when you talk of the perception problem and when you talk of credit deficiency, because they have gone up from the priority sector and they have started walking and they fall in the medium sector. Medium sector in today's India is a nowhere land. It is not priority sector. So when banks look at a company in the medium sector or in the mid-corporate sector or in once a SME has started walking, it is no different from lending to a large corporate or a super large corporate. It gets categorized in the same manner. Since 80% of bank finance is by public sector banks, and public sector banks are mandated to adhere to achieving certain set ratios of their lending, so much X amount to go to priority sector, so much X amount. So when they are doing the priority sector lending, the perspective is different. They are doing non-priority sector lending, the perspective is different. And since a medium scale industry onwards, it becomes non-priority sector, and you don't have CGT MSE cover, there is no guarantee cover, there's no this thing. The norms and attitudes are same as that for a large corporate. And concepts of credit worthiness, risk appetite, collateralization, NPA, those topics come up. So this gap feeling is, I think, most of them would be in the non-micro and non-small sector rather than in.
Okay. Let me ask you, now Mr. Ranganathan, you've already talked about that there is a funding gap, maybe in the medium scale, but not so much in the micro. In your view, is there a funding gap among SMEs?
Well, as per a recent study of the IFC IntelliCap, a certain funding gap was indicated, which was based on which are the SMEs which are credit worthy in a way, you know. So is it, when we talk of a credit gap, the first question is it credit worthy? Is it an addressable gap, really? You know, that is the issue we look at firstly. Now, there are a large number of micro units wanting to graduate to small. There are a large number of small units wanting to graduate to medium and beyond. So I would personally feel there is definitely a gap both on the lending side in terms of borrowings, and more importantly, there is a gap on the equity side. If a unit wants to scale up, they are required to bring in a certain amount of equity to meet the debt equity requirements of the commercial banks. Now, whatever by and large a unit is earning, except taking out some money for their day-to-day living, gets plowed back into an MSME unit by and large. So that is already plowed back. Over and above that, when they need to bring in that additional equity, that is one of the major gaps which units face today. Then on working capital front, there is possibly a gap because working capital, though it is supposed to be, you know, looked at in a prospective manner in the sense that what is going to be your sales projection for the next year, based on that 20% of the amount is given as your working capital. In practice, in many of the cases, it does not necessarily happen like that. Thirdly, the gap arises on account of receivable financing, which is a very, very major gap. Most of the MSMEs supply to large corporates. And as and when they make the supplies, they draw a bill on the large corporate, or it could be just an invoice. The corporate may take as many as 90 days to pay that. In many cases, the working capital cycle, 180 days. And in the stress the economy went through in the last 2 or 3 years, the cycle was even further elongated beyond 180 days. So this is where the working capital of the MSME gets impacted. And that is why there would be gaps in these areas in particular.
Okay. Mr. Ranganathan, you mentioned that there's a gap in the middle sector. Would you like to elaborate on that?
See, today India SMEs, they are living in a globalized world. We have increasingly opened up our markets to companies from all over the world. Now, if Indian companies have to be supported in that environment, institutionally, we must have a same approach to SMEs as the rest of the world has. Second, conceptually, companies in India must understand that given the logistics revolution and given the information revolution, scale economies are very important. And scale economies can come in by size, or scale economies can come in by clustering. And financing clusters of companies doing the same thing is far easier for a commercial bank than financing individual entities standing alone by themselves. And if you see the experience of companies which are in successful clusters, and I suspect units in Faridabad, etc., would have a less of a challenge in accessing bank finance than unit outside. So the concept of clustering, concept of helping your sister, your friend's unit coming up at the same time is good for you. Because the competition is no longer between X unit and Y unit. The competition today is between Guangzhou and Firozabad, or Guangzhou and Meerut, or Hyderabad. And unless these clusters become large enough, you will lose out in the battle. When banks lend, they see the chances of advance going bad or not going bad. If you are in a successful cluster, the brand reputation of neighboring companies will assist you in a number of. If there is a delayed receivable problem, if 30 units are having a delayed receivable problem, banks will be far more lenient about it, thinking there is a systemic, it's not going to go bad, than if you're an individual chap battling alone. So this is the thought process which I would urge companies and entrepreneurs to think about, because it is something which you cannot wish away and it will not go away. It will intensify as time goes on. and the problem will become more difficult.
My view on debt versus equity is that on the debt side, there are a lot of schemes. On the equity side, there's a major problem. The reason for the problem is there's no collateral, right? And so you have this trust factor for the investor. He has nothing to hold on to. An equity investor, it's not interesting at all, because the only reason for an equity investor to take that leap of faith, to take that big risk, is because he thinks the payoff is going to be huge and there's going to be a great growth story ahead. So if half of the community of SMEs is not interested in that, that means half are excluded from the equity opportunity, say from angel investors and VCs. The difference between angel and VC is VCs are institutions that take other people's money and invest it on their behalf in companies, and then they then exit from those companies and return the money. So they are a temporary organization. A venture capital firm is not even a corporation. It is a limited life company. In other words, they are set up to last for about 7 years, and then they dissolve. And the reason they dissolve is because the investors in these firms, they want their money back. So they must dissolve. These are temporary institutions. So a venture capital firm is a group of individuals who manage a temporary pool of capital. And they're not even a temporary pool of capital. It's actually commitments to a temporary pool of capital. In other words, no money is collected until the investment is made in each company. So these are intermediaries. A venture capital firm is an intermediary, whereas an angel investor is an individual, and these are not necessarily very rich people. I think, in fact, the very richest people don't really do much angel investing because it's too small. It's not worth their time. So usually these are individuals who have some money and they like to invest in startups. And it's their own money. So they're not an intermediary. It's not a temporary pool of capital. It's not commitments. It's their own money. They write the check. They invest directly into the company. So there's a big difference between an angel investor and a VC firm.